Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to go over, so we'll just jump right in. Welcome to Learning Allies College Success Program webinar, Where's the Cafeteria? Orientation and Mobility on your college campus, even if it's virtual. My name is Katie Otaggio, and I am the Engagement Operations Manager for the College Success Program at Learning Ally. I'm going to pass you over to my colleague, Abigail Shaw, who's going to give you a little bit more information. She works on the College Success Program team as well as our mentor coordinator. Abigail?
Thanks, Katie. So everyone, welcome again. I just wanted to provide some keys for later on in the webinar when we'll be doing some Q&A. So at that time, we'll ask people to raise their hand if they have a question. If you're on a PC, the key is Alt-Y. On a Mac, it's Option-Y. And if you're calling in on the phone, it's *9. You should also be able to find the raise hand feature in the Zoom mobile app. I believe it's under. Feel free to add any questions into the chat box, and we will be looking at those questions in about 40-ish minutes. And now I'm going to pass it to Chris Tabb, who is also part of our College Success Program team as our content editor.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Tabb, and I am the Curriculum and Content Editor for the College Success Program. And during this meeting, I'll be keeping time as our moderator, Stephanie, asks our presenter, Chris, the questions that we've come up with for him based on feedback that we've gotten from program students and folk rehab professionals and people who are really interested in how orientation and mobility works in general for college and how it works specifically during this time. So I would like to introduce the program director, Mary Alexander, who will talk about the presenters.
Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate that. So as Kristen said, I'm the program director for the College Success Program by Learning Ally. And I'm also a mom of a young man who is blind and has cerebral palsy, who knows very well one of our speakers today. Our first speaker is Chris Tabb. Chris is an orientation and mobility specialist, and he works very hard to advance the independence of students and clients. He provides training opportunities and knowledge exchange for professionals and families. He brings accessible information to the community, and he is presently employed at the Maryland School for the Blind as the Orientation and Mobility Supervisor. Chris has worked as an orientation and mobility specialist in California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Texas, and Maryland, providing services in residential programs and as an itinerant. He's an outreach specialist providing technical assistance and as a private contractor. Chris enjoys working with all age groups, including infants and toddlers, school-age students, adults, and senior populations. And his professional interests are all things O&M, as well as assistive technology. He has written the majority of our College Success Program's travel and O&M course, and he serves on our advisory panel. I'm also really happy to say that Chris will come back to the Texas School for the Blind, where he has worked with us for many, many years, working in our outreach department and being our orientation and mobility specialist there. Also joining us today is Stephanie Zundel. Stephanie and her seeing eye dog Marley currently live in Colorado, and Stephanie is an elementary school counselor there. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Child Studies with minors in Special Education and Sociology, and a master's degree in Education in School Counseling, and all of these were from Vanderbilt University. She's a tandem cycler who recently went to the World Championships in Milton, Canada, where she and her pilot represented the US and won a bronze medal. She has run in the New York City and Boston marathons, has junior and senior black belts in White Tiger Kempo, and has been boxing since the age of 10. As someone with a visual impairment, Stephanie thinks two of the most important skills to have are self-advocacy and orientation and mobility skills. And she believes that educating and advocating are the key factors to having a successful college experience. Stephanie works with us on the College Success Program as a mentor, and we value her very much in that role. So I'm going to pass our webinar over to you, Stephanie, and you, Chris. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mary.
Okay,
So
great.
as Mary said, I'm Stephanie Zundel, and I'm just going to be facilitating. So basically just asking Chris some questions, and he's going to spend some time answering each of those questions. And then any question that we did not cover that you still have at the end, like Abigail said, you will have the chance to either type those into the chat box or raise your hand and verbally ask those, and we'll answer as many as we can. So our first question that we want to start out with today is for our high school students. So what are some orientation and mobility considerations you should keep in mind when choosing a college?
So I'm going to add, Stephanie, real quick, that hopefully folks will be asking questions in the chat, and we have a whole group of folks who are helping to be able to monitor the chat. So if you have things that come up as we're discussing these questions or side questions, please do include them in the chat so that everyone can benefit from the questions that you have. It helps everyone to learn a little bit more. In terms of choosing a college campus, let's just kind of put them in categories. We'll say that there are some schools that are big, like going to Disneyland or Disney World, other schools that are very small, that are much more intimate settings, and then we have some colleges that are in between. Sometimes we have personality types that match us for one or the other. You also have to think about your ability to travel independently. If you need to be able to go to the grocery store, is there going to be public transportation that allows that to happen? Are there some colleges actually have right next to or within the college stores that allow you to pick up your groceries? If you're planning to be living in a dorm and you're going to be using the cafeteria plan, that may not be something that you need to have. Those basic concepts of how will I get where I need to go extend beyond your first year into your second, third, fourth, so on, because though you may be living in the dorm as a freshman, you may be looking to move off campus as a sophomore or a junior or a senior. So those considerations that are a little bit farther away are still important to think about when you plan for which college might be best. What I encourage everyone to do is to have an open mind and visit each different size of campus so that you can get a feeling of what it's like. It may be that you get to a large campus and you like the fact that there are basically pockets or areas. They go by different names. It could be called a quad somewhere. It could be called a field somewhere else, or different areas where students gather. Those things can be very helpful for some people, and they can be very challenging for others. When we think about the climate, some people are really, like in Texas, you're primarily going to be used to warmer weather. If you go to a school that's in North Dakota, you'll have some weather conditions to prepare for. Knowing how quickly the school is able to clear those pathways can be very important. So thinking about how will I get from my dorm or from my living location to my classroom building is going to be critical for you to be able to access your classes in a timely manner, to be able to be where professors will expect you to be. If you are working with a disabled student service office, they may have certain criteria that you have to meet in terms of getting your accessible materials. They may also be able to help you with transportation on campus. There are some campuses that will provide shuttle rides from one location to another when the weather is such that it would make it difficult to travel. Keeping an open mind to lots of different options is the best ticket to consider at the beginning.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. So our next question is related. So how can a student best prepare for the adjustment to orientation and mobility on a college campus?
The best thing to do is to try it out. So all through your senior year, even your junior year and before that, and certainly before you transition to college, is to go and to put yourself on that college campus. Some colleges are set up in downtown environments where things are much more grid-like. There are other colleges that are in rural settings where instead of having a grid of sidewalks, they are kind of an interwoven web of paved pathways. It can make it very confusing to try to find landmarks, remembering your pathways when you have to connect to the correct path on the web to get to where you need to go. There are certain apps that we can talk about, we'll talk about a little bit later, that can be helpful in finding some of those locations to make your turns or have your decision points. The adjustment process can be facilitated by just having some time on the ground to be able to practice walking from place to place. As an example, it might be that you use an app like Blind Square to put the latitude and the longitude of a building that you need to go to, the science building, the student union, and you practice traveling to those locations using the app for guidance. There's lots of different ways to do that, but having the practice on the campus is an ideal way for you to take away some of that anxiety that can happen, to be able to find the frustrating areas and then to strategize how you're going to address those. It might be working with family members, it might be working with an orientation mobility specialist, or just giving yourself some extra time so that you can discover new pathways to get to where you need to be.
Awesome. So we just talked about traveling on the college campus. So how can students best practice traveling in their communities and using public transit?
Well, the answer that I'm going to give is a general answer. I think we have some information coming up about our current conditions with COVID, but the general answer in terms of traveling in your community and using public transportation, if you pick places that are fun to go to, let's say you like ice cream. If you decide that over the summer, you're going to practice going to Baskin and Robbins or to a mall where they serve pretzels, something that you find enjoyable, you're going to be much more likely to carry out that practice and then to be able to reward yourself with whatever's at the end of your route. It might be a movie, it might be meeting friends, it might be going to the grocery store to pick up your favorite ice cream, whatever it could be. It gives you a purpose for going, allows you to have practice with using your cane or your dog, traveling in the community, for accessing the transit, and then finding out how long it takes you to get home, for instance. So can you buy ice cream or do you have to eat it before you get home? Will it melt before I get there? Those can be fun activities to learn about. So just having those opportunities to practice is what makes it happen. And keeping in mind that for most people, it's not a one and done. Sometimes there's things like apps that we can learn quickly by just trying them once. For the most part, travel is something that we have to have multiple experiences with so that we can learn those details. It's a process, and it isn't something that we can speed up the process on. It's something that our brain needs a certain amount of time to be able to assimilate that new information.
Great. So I know that you started talking about this when you mentioned Blind Square, but what are some common mapping options students can use?
Well, there are different kinds of maps. There are cognitive maps, which are maps that we keep in our mind, like when we have to walk from the kitchen to the bathroom, we know the basic route. Or it might be down the street to the post office or the library or a friend's house. There are print maps that some people are able to use by enlarging. There are also tactile maps that people can order. There are some places like what's called Mad Labs, a facility at the San Francisco Lighthouse that will produce a map for your home area. Some people are using 3D printers to make maps of different areas. Those tactile maps give you a general reference of space. It may be that some people use a tactile image enhancer, sometimes called a POF machine, to be able to make a map that is embossed. Lots of different ways of creating maps. Sometimes universities will also have tactile map options that you can even feed through a Braille embosser so that you can have a consumable product. In other words, one that's stored in a digital file so that if you lose it, you just make another one. Sometimes you have to create your own maps. Those are ways of, you could use spaghetti noodles, you could use dried beans to basically have items representing pathways, items representing buildings. You're creating a sense of space. There are certainly technological ways, and when we think of high tech, where I can use a digital breadcrumb to be able to know where I want to go. There's apps like Soundscape from Microsoft that are free that unfortunately at the moment only runs on an iOS device, but there are other apps for the Android devices as well. There's apps like APH Nearby Explorer, so that if you happen to be in high school, that's one that you can receive on quota funds if you talk with your TBI or your O&M specialist. The app itself has a free version and a paid version right now, although they're moving to just the free version. Those mapping options allow you to create landmarks. The app Blind Square is unique in that it allows you to create a landmark by using latitude and longitude. You can go in and edit that. So you could look up the latitude and longitude of the front porch of the science building, put that into your phone, and have that as a landmark without ever having been to that campus. The benefit of that on a campus that it's sprawling is that if the building is off the street grid, it allows you to have a reference to get to that front of that building without turning right on First Street and going north on Main Street, because in the center of the campus, those street references do not exist.
Hey, Chris, this is Abigail. I'm going to interrupt real quick. We had a question in the chat for you to better or further describe what digital breadcrumbs are.
Oh, certainly. The story of Hansel and Gretel with two young children going out and laying down breadcrumbs so that they could find their way back. That's where that breadcrumb analogy comes from. But it's basically making a landmark or a point of interest using that map. So you're reserving a spot in the digital form on your smartphone, or if you have something like the Victor Reader Trek that's a standalone GPS, or its predecessor, the Trekker Breeze, they allow you to keep track of locations. In the background, it's stored with a latitude and longitude. There are some programs, like there's one called What 3 Words, that instead of using latitude and longitude, it uses a combination of what appears to be 3 random words, but every place, let's say every 3-meter square block of the planet is mapped to 3 specific words. And it's basically just a way of saying, within this 10 to 30 foot bubble, I know where I'm at by its name. Just like you typically have a first name, a middle name, and a last name, every spot on Earth can have a first name, a middle name, and a last name. Latitude and longitude, a little bit different, but that's how computer systems or our smartphones are keeping track of our location. When we save that information, it helps us to navigate back to that spot.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So I know for me in particular, tactile maps were extremely helpful when I first moved to my college campus. So our next question that we have for you, Chris, is when students move to college or when they're on their own, what are some tips that you have about staying safe without staying sheltered?
Well, staying safe is something that we have to kind of open this box up a little bit. Safety means different things to different people. There are many things that happen in the world that we hope wouldn't happen. For some people, staying safe means not getting struck by lightning. For other people, staying safe means not being mugged, not having somebody steal my stuff, not being physically assaulted. Those types of questions are very broad and far-reaching. So I'm going to start with just a general description. The general awareness that you want to have in any environment, especially an unknown and uncontrolled environment. If you're in your room, you kind of control that space. Basically, it's your space. You can put things wherever you want. Nobody's really going to disturb it. When you go down into the other part of your house, now you're sharing space with others, but there's still generally people who you have a kind of an unspoken agreement with that everybody's going to respect each other. When you step out your door, your level of control drops significantly. When you leave your community, it drops again. So when you're on a college campus, there are many, many people. there are people in the world who could be considered predators. They're looking for victims. They're looking for someone to do something to, take something from. And so the only way we can be aware of a predator, whether it's a saber-toothed tiger or a 300-pound person, is to be aware. If I put earbuds in my ears and I'm thinking about everything that I'm going to do this weekend, my brain is occupied with my imagination. My ears are occupied with music or a book or other things. I can't really be aware of the footsteps that might be continuously following me. I can't be aware of some subtleties that would be in the environment. So keeping your ears open, keeping your senses alert to changes around you and your personal space are very important. The ability to communicate with others about your location. And I know some people are just beginning to enjoy their independence from their parents. So it could be friends. But if nobody knows that you're supposed to be home at 8 o'clock and you don't show up at 8 o'clock, if nobody knows that you're supposed to be there, nobody will know you're missing. And that can go on for days. So communicating to people your basic schedule so that you're basically accountability partners, letting them know, well, this is my schedule. If I'm not home by 8 o'clock each night, could you let somebody know? Could you let public safety know? Those are things that are important, because if no one knows when you're supposed to be somewhere, they won't know to call for help.
Awesome. Those are really great points. And Chris brings up a good point. The public safety office at your college, that's a really good number to always put in your contacts. And there's also the share your location feature in a lot of iPhones and other smartphones. So that's also really helpful to be able to communicate your location. So Chris, our next question is, what are some orientation apps you recommend, both in general and during this crazy time of social distancing?
Well, the apps that we use for orientation, there were some questions in the chat about Soundscape. Just to give you an example, it might be that I use an app like Soundscape where I can mark a spot, the student union, for instance, because I want to go and visit with people or go and get food. It's an app that helps me to know where to point myself to go there. It's not something that many people, I guess, if you are thinking about what will most people use, like Facebook and Instagram and those types of apps, this is something that's much more specific to individuals who are non-visual travelers or low vision travelers. If you want to be able to use an orientation app like Google Maps or Apple Maps, that's something that's very much mainstream. So when Stephanie shared about sharing your location, you can share your location through Google Maps, Apple Maps, Messages, lots of different ways to share your location. If you're using a map for orientation during transportation, there's an app called Transit that provides wonderful information, both for those that need bold, large print. But what it basically does is, as soon as you open the app, it tells you every public transportation service that's nearby you. It knows your location if you give it permission on your phone, and tells you what's around, when it will be arriving, which direction it's going. Those are very, very helpful things. There's also the ability to just say to your phone, okay, Siri, or hey, okay, Google, or hey, Siri, where am I? And it will give you the basic information. So some of those things are built right into our phones. Some of those things we add in as an extra option. The orientation that someone has really depends on the level of independence that you're able to demonstrate at the present time or grow toward. So orientation might be, oh my gosh, I'm in this building and I forgot which way I came from. Indoors, we have a much different sense of orientation. That's a place where we might use some things that have to do with Bluetooth. There are some schools that have a system of beacons and they use a Bluetooth low energy to help with orientation indoors. That's typically not something that you're going to install yourself, but it might be something that's helpful to ask your school, do you have beacons, navigation beacons that are installed in any of these buildings to aid in orientation? Outside, we can do much better with our GPS ability, but indoors we're hindered by the ceiling and the walls that block that signal from the GPS.
That's really great advice, Chris. So our next question that we have are, what are some O&M challenges that are specific or unique to the COVID crisis during this time? And how have you and others in your field been solving these problems?
Well, some of the challenges that are unique at the moment, probably the most often asked question that I hear is, how can you do guide technique when you can't get close to someone? I guess I should preface this with, I am not a doctor. I'm just going on general recommendations. If you have a safety pack that you go out with, such as a hip pack or a fanny pack, or even something that you wear like a purse or a satchel, that you can keep gloves, a mask, hand sanitizer, that you have that with you at all times, you will make things much safer for yourself and whomever you are interacting with. If you think about when you have to push buttons, think about what else you can use besides your hands to push the buttons. Can I use my elbow to use the crosswalk button, the accessible pedestrian signal? If I use my elbow, now I don't have to worry about putting my elbow near my mouth, because I don't really know anyone who can stretch their elbow to get near their mouth. So there's lots of ways to minimize the amount of contact that we would have with spaces that other people are going to be touching. In terms of guiding, what you might do is you might think, well, I'm going to, if I don't want to touch another person, I might bring something like a piece of PVC pipe that might be like a relay stick, or even a piece of bungee cord. You hold one side, they hold the other. It's something that you can then sanitize. You're not actually touching that person. If you think about the part that you're grabbing, if you're worried about that somebody sneezed in their elbow and I'm going to grab their elbow to be guided, you may ask, could you place your hand on their back or on their shoulder, which is a much less likely place that that sneeze or that cough would have landed. So there's some basic strategies that you can use that minimize the amount of direct contact with those sensitive body parts that we would be trying to avoid.
I love that. And a lot of blind people, even use a tether or a rope or a cord, like you were saying, even just for the running community.
Yes.
In general, even not during COVID. So that's a really great point to bring up. So our last question that we have before the Q&A session, Chris, is also related to COVID and social distance, but how can students keep up with their O&M skills when travel options are limited?
So just to give you an example, many of the lessons that we've been conducting as orientation mobility specialists during remote instruction times have to do with, I might be calling a student using Zoom or Google Meet, or just on the phone, and we're talking about planning transportation. To think about, if I were going to use a transportation network company like an Uber or a Lyft, what types of information do I need to have before I make that connection? How do I provide communication to the driver? How do I keep myself safe to know, is this my driver? What can I do to make sure that I travel safely to where I'm going? If I let anybody know where I'm going? Some people actually take a picture of the driver and send it to a trusted friend so that if anything did happen, they'd have some record of who the driver was. There's also the use of Google Maps, Apple Maps, or another transportation app that allows you to be able to plan your trips, to be able to talk about, well, let's see, I could use bus 53 and then connect with bus 84, and this is the corner I have to be at. But going through the process of planning travel makes it much more efficient when we have to do it for real. So you're basically building yourself scenarios practicing to plan those scenarios so that when you have to do that on the fly, when you've got 1 hour between classes and you have to try to get to Starbucks that requires a bus trip, you'll be able to do that quickly.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris.
Sure.
Abigail, do we want to open it up to Q&A now?
Yeah, I think we had one question that was sent ahead of time. If you want to go ahead and pose that one to Chris, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if anyone has questions, feel free to post them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute people individually.
Great. Yeah. So one question that got emailed to us earlier today or yesterday was a great question. And it's, how do we navigate an apartment complex that we might be new to and the area around that apartment complex?
Okay, it's a very good question. Many apartment complexes the units are very similar. Sometimes we can find things that are unique, such as my apartment is near the pool, or my apartment is near the laundry room, or my apartment is near the mailboxes. We can use those permanent landmarks, those permanent features, as clues to help us get to where we need to go. Sometimes we're in areas that don't have any of those things. There are some people who will have just basically a sense of time and distance, and they're very good at knowing when they get to the third building. They listen for the gaps between the building. It's basically a passive or an active echolocation that they're using to know where they are. If there's a person who cannot use those skills, either because they haven't developed them, or maybe they have some other things that prohibit that being possible, there are some workarounds that, just as an example, there's a wireless doorbell. This wouldn't be the first thing I would recommend. This is kind of like, if all else fails, then we move to something that's adapted. But basically, you put a wireless doorbell outside your door, and you have the button, the clicker for the doorbell in your pocket. So when you get close, you can push the button, and now you hear the doorbell ring. And now it's simply a matter of using auditory localization. I walk toward the sound of the doorbell. And basically, your doorbell is outside your apartment door. When you hear it ring, you walk to it. That doesn't help us using our skills for orienting to places on campus that are new, things like that. But in an apartment complex where everything can be the same, while you're learning your way around, that can really facilitate your travel.
Chris, can I add one thing?
Sure.
So I think one thing that I have done in the past in apartment complexes is you can ask your leasing office, if you're a Braille reader, you can make your own little Braille labels. So if you need to label, your specific apartment door, or maybe the laundry room door, because maybe it feels the same as other units, you could ask them if you could put those Braille labels, because they already exist in print. So if the apartment complex doesn't already have them in Braille, or if they don't know how to go about doing that, or if they're not willing to, you can ask them if you can make your own labels. And a lot of apartment complexes have fancy coffee machines and things like that. And a lot of those things nowadays are touchscreen. So you could ask your leasing office if you could put tactile stickers or Braille or things like that to help navigate those specific pieces of apartment complexes.
That's terrific, Stephanie. And using those details, sometimes it's a simple, I know the laundry room has a round handled door knob, and the main office has a flat handled doorknob. Looking at those details, paying attention to the subtleties can really help you to have some more definition to your environment.
So
Awesome.
we have a question from Alira. You're unmuted now if you'd like to share your question.
Yep. Hello. Hey, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm really liking your talk so far. Anyway, I had a question because my school, I go to school in Pennsylvania, so my school, they're hoping that we go back in the fall. I mean, it's looking like we are, but should I be, because I know I'm going to be navigating to different buildings and different rooms. So should I be asking my VR or my college counselor to schedule O&M now, or should I wait? Because I'm not really sure if the school's going to open, but it looks like it will.
And I apologize, I got distracted there for a moment. The reaching out to, there's a lot of people who just don't know some of these answers yet. It can be very challenging for administrators to determine what's going to be safe. As more people come out into the community and we have spikes or possible spikes, increases in infections, sometimes the rules that we set today or the guidelines that we set today will change in a day, in a week, in a month. What I encourage you to do is to keep that constant communication channel open. Reaching out to your advisors to let them know your unique needs. Many people do not understand the unique travel needs that travelers who are blind and visually impaired have. So helping them to know that it's imperative for you to be able to know where your classes are so that you can travel to them and have extra time to practice. Many people think, well, they'll just, everybody will just do it on the fly, isn't necessarily going to be so easy to do. Letting them know that you would like to work with an orientation mobility specialist or a friend or a family member to plan those routes as you have to travel to them non-visually or in a different fashion will help them to have a better understanding of your needs so that they can time that appropriately. I don't know if I answered your question or not, Alara, sorry.
Oh, yep, you did. Thank you.
Great. So we also had a couple questions about apps. So maybe we can do this in a multi-prong approach. There were two questions to have. One was asking about if things like Google Maps could be used for virtual mobility. I'm not entirely sure what virtual mobility means, but maybe you have a better understanding. And then another individual also asked to have you describe how beacons work with indoor travel.
Okay, and I apologize. I may need some reminders, so you may have to jump in and remind me of the question.
Sure.
Here. Thank you, Abigail. The apps like Google Maps for virtual travel, the best approximation of Google Streets or Google Street View or Google Maps where we zoom in visually and travel up and down a street, the best place that I've found that has that approximate in non-visual terms is going to be APH Nearby Explorer, because it lets you visit a place virtually and then it lets you travel north, south, east, or west using basically a compass that's presented on the smartphone so that you can go up and down a street, to the right, to the left, forward, backward, although it's labeled north, south, east, and west, so that you can virtually explore. You can also use other apps like Blind Square or seeing, Blind Square, APH Nearby Explorer, and the other name is escaping me at the moment, to do virtual exploration. You can go somewhere and basically point your phone in different directions so it's as though you were standing on a corner in another country or wherever you're looking at, another state, another city. When you turn your phone, you can hear what's in the distance in all those areas. You can, for lack of a better way to put this, look around with that smartphone to know what would be around if you were standing at the address that you give it. There are other ways to virtually travel where what you're really doing is you're previewing your route. If right now I said that I wanted to go to the White House, I could put that into Google Maps, Apple Maps, any other map program, and it would generate a route for me. I could then choose whether I wanted to be a driving route, public transportation route, a pedestrian route, or even on a bicycle. And it would give me the step-by-step directions that I need to get there. And I could preview my trip. I could preview which turns I would have to make, how long each leg of my trip would be. And so that's another way of doing virtual travel where you're previewing what's going to happen. So hopefully that answered that question. Beacons and GPS are somewhat similar in that they can both help you with your location, but they go about it in different ways. A beacon tells you how far away you are from the beacon itself. And so it's about proximity, where GPS is concerned with your location on the planet by using satellites that are orbiting the Earth all the time, the Global Positioning System or other systems from other countries. GPS system is basically a United States system, and it knows your basically your position in an X, Y, and Z plane, and it can tell you the spot that you're at on the Earth, but it can't tell you how close to something else you are. And it only works within, at the moment in the United States, within about a 30-foot bubble of accuracy. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to about a 16-foot bubble of accuracy. There are other satellite systems that are being employed around the world that are much more accurate. Initially, the United States government had not allowed everyday folks to have that level of accuracy for our safety. It was reserved for the military, so that somebody couldn't target your house with anything that would bring harm. And so those things are changing, though, as we move forward. More and more information and more accurate information is available. If I want to find something in a mall, let's say a particular pair of shoes, I might use a GPS to get me to the mall. And then as I go into the mall, the beacon will help me to get close to the pair of shoes I want, because the beacon knows how far away I am from it using interference. More interference means I'm farther away. Less interference means I'm closer. So that signal strength is how the beacon works. The GPS has to do with basically beaming a signal from a satellite to where your device is. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense.
Yeah, I think that was a great explanation from the little bit of knowledge I had previously about beacons, so thank you. And we have a couple people who have hands raised. I'm going to get to you in a second, but we also had a lot of questions in the chat about apps, and someone wanted like a specific list. Other people had questions about free versus pay. We could probably touch on some of them. We could also have a whole webinar about apps. So maybe if you want to highlight a few, but I also wanted to see if maybe you could direct folks to a list that might already exist on the web.
And I lost a bit of what you were saying at the end there, Ms. Abigail. Could you repeat that last?
Sure. Sorry, my connectivity is spotty today, but the last bit was going over a comprehensive list might be beyond the scope of this webinar. Do you know of a list where folks could find it on the internet or elsewhere?
And I do. I just put something into the chat that was that is a link to live binders, and I'm looking up another page right now that I haven't updated for a while, but I'm going to post that in a second. The live binder is a collection of binders that are all O&M related. And that live binder has some things that are about, has some binders that are specifically about technology, has some binders that are about the O&M use of technology or maps, lots of different topics on O&M. So for those that feel comfortable, go ahead and explore through there. For those that want just a much more tailored list, I'm also putting in a link that is for a website called Sensory Travel. And this has a list of, basically it's a list of apps with some simple descriptions. Apps are changing so quickly that some of these may no longer be available. Some of them get added that I haven't put on there yet. I don't think I've updated for a year, and lots of things change in a year in the app world. For the moment, most people can download some apps for free. Nearby Explorer from APH is available on both platforms. They're sometimes, I don't know what phase they're in right now. The Nearby Explorer Online is free. At some point, Nearby Explorer Online will be the only one offered, so they will all be free, but they being APH were not going to have that full transition yet until they had everything available in the free version. and they're still working on those details. So there is a paid version, which doesn't carry, the free version doesn't carry everything that the paid version does. Again, if you happen to be a high school student, you can get that via quota funds from APH. Just talk to your TVI or your O&M about that. There are other apps like Seeing Eye GPS. The Seeing Eye GPS is something that I think has the first 30 days for free. So that's another one to try out. There's another one called Lazarillo, which somebody mentioned in the chat. Lazarillo is free. It doesn't have quite as many features as the paid apps. Blind Square is another app that's very popular. It's only available at the moment, I believe, on the iOS system. Lazarillo and Nearby Explorer both exist on the Android platform as well as the iOS platform.
And we do have a list of the apps on our curriculum. So anyone who is a member can log in and access the Travel and O&M course. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to us later. And we probably should update that article because there are new apps like Nearby Explorer that I don't think are on there.
So we have someone waiting to ask a question. Nick, I have asked you to unmute if you'd like to go ahead and pose your question to Chris.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Nick.
Okay, yeah, my question has to do, first of all, comment. I love that concept about the wireless doorbell. And a lot of those, now that you mention it, can do like melodies, like you can change it. Of course, you know, you'd want to be careful with that approach, but I can see that being useful. My question has to do with when you brought up the whole Braille label deal, because you're right, a lot of places don't always have Braille labels. If a complex is interested in getting their labels brailled, where is a good place for them to look to do that?
There are lots of companies
Okay.
that produce signage. Basically, any signage company
Okay.
that is producing materials for, for buildings
Yes.
can do that because they're required to do that by the ADA
Yes.
at a new school. So for the most part, any company can do that. You can do a simple Google search. There's also places like the American Council for the Blind and
Yes.
the National Federation of the Blind that will generally have some suggestions of companies that they've worked with, I believe. Did I answer your question, Nick?
Okay, so I actually had a question because I actually just got a trek from my rehab counselor. I'm transferring from a community college to a university that's huge. My idea was that I was going to be able to use a trek at the university. So 2 questions. What is your experience and your thoughts with how the trek works in like open area mode? And then number 2 is how can I practice with open area if the university's closed, just to try to get familiar with it?
So the Trek, for those that are not familiar, the Victor Reader Trek is from Humanware. It's a standalone GPS. It's a non-visual GPS, so it's all auditory. The present model is based on the Victor Reader Stream, and those same buttons are used for orientation in the orientation mode. And Jeremy, the open air mode, or excuse me, the open area mode, you can use that anywhere. What I encourage you to do is to go someplace like a large park, a regional park, a city park, where you're off the street grid. You can lock into open area mode so that if you do get close to a street, it won't bounce back to the map grid. But by doing that, you can pick a spot. It might be where the restrooms are, and practice going away from the restroom and then traveling back to it. So there's, for those of you that have ever played a getting warmer game where somebody's playing a game and you're trying to find something that's hidden and they say, oh, you're getting warmer as you get close. It's what's called the getting warmer method. It will tell you when you mark a landmark how many feet away you are, or yards or meters, depending on the options that you're choosing. If the number gets smaller, you're going in the right direction. If the number gets bigger, you're going away from it. So the idea of using that getting warmer method is the device keeps track of your distance. The difference between a Trek and an app on a smartphone is that the smartphone, like an iPhone, has a compass built into it. The Trek does not have a compass. So the Trek knows which way you're walking only when you're walking. It doesn't know which way you're pointing unless you're walking in that direction. So I have to basically walk 30 feet for it to know where I'm going. It has to sense a change. If I'm just using a smartphone, if the app is accessing the compass information, I could turn right or left and it would know whether I'm facing north, south, east, or west, or toward 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, if it's using a clock face reference. When you use a device like the Trek, you actually have to keep walking. It will help you to get to where you want to go, but you may have to walk and basically be making a mistake in order to have it correct where you're going.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
So there've been, this is Abigail again, there have been a few questions and kind of comments about safety and helping people feel more safe as states and communities reopen after COVID.
Yes.
And I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that, Chris. I know that none of us here are public health professionals or doctors, but do you have any additional thoughts or remarks on students and O&M instructors continuing to be safe as we all navigate a new kind of normal?
Well, this is an area that the entire world is exploring together, and everyone's figuring it out as we go. Nobody has all the answers. There, in the live binders that I shared, there's actually a binder that's about coming back from social distancing, or about social distancing in general. The title of that particular binder, and I apologize, there's like 40 binders. This one is called Resources for O&M and Social Distancing. And it includes things from the, as an example, from the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, that talks about respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette. It talks about different kinds of face coverings. There's also documents that have been prepared by other agencies that talk about how to keep your cane and visual aids clean. In other words, how to keep them sanitized. There are some pieces of information from, one of the ones that I think is very helpful is from England, that talks about how to prepare schools to reopen, what considerations need to be made. So there's lots of documents that are available in those live binders. Without knowing specific individuals and what their needs are, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what to share. But the live binder includes resources for just, let's say, everyday folks who are just trying to go to the grocery store to do their basic things, how to be safe. It also includes things for professionals who work in facilities who are trying to prepare their facility to have people re-enter the facility. How do we keep students safe in a school when we're used to being so close together? How do we all stay 6 feet apart? So there's lots of resources that are in there. Without knowing a specific example of what somebody needs, I could talk endlessly and not even get close to what it is that they're really hoping to know. So hopefully those documents will allow people to zoom into exactly what type of question that they have.
Thank you, Chris. Let's see, we had a more specific question about someone who's attending a beep ball tournament later in July. And I think you may have addressed some of their, none of us have a 100% understanding or even crystal ball that can tell us how we should all get around after this COVID situation. but their question was more about how can players keep distance. Again, this context is beepball. They mentioned they really liked the human guide idea with placing their hand on someone's shoulder. So I guess maybe if you had anything additional to say about your remarks earlier, guide with a tether or holding onto someone's shoulder.
So in terms of any game that's participated where we have players on our own team and players on other teams, and we're all trying to get to one particular ball, that's going to be tough because the concept of the game is to bring you in closer to each other because everyone's trying to get to the same target. If it's something like goal ball, where we have 3 players on each team, that the players are going to be spread about 6 feet apart just from the nature of their positions. But that sense of space that people have around them, everyone knows their sense of space differently. So it can be that you begin to have some activities with your teammates about understanding, how do I know when you're that close? It might be that you come up with an agreement that while we're practicing this game, we're all going to be wearing a small noise-making device, like a small beeper. So I can always hear where people are because I can hear them beeping around me. Or it might be that you agree that you're just going to keep up a constant conversation so that I always hear your voice. I always know your relative location. Those are ways that you can keep track of who's nearby and about how far away they are. It just takes some cooperation with one another.
Thanks, Chris. I think our last question as we start to draw to a close is from Jennifer. It sounds like she's an O&M instructor or an educator of some kind. She says that she is not sure how face-to-face instruction is going to work come the fall. So do you have any advice on how educators and O&M instructors can help support students maybe as we continue to distance or do things virtually, how they can help cultivate these O&M skills?
So if you think about heading out on a lesson with a student, if you can use some things like, this really depends on the ability of the student. For an advanced student, if I can have the bone conduction headphones on, the aftershocks, and the student can have on their aftershocks, and we can connect with a phone call, now we can be more than 6 feet apart, still maintaining conversation and keeping our ear canals open to be able to hear environmental sounds. That would be the most ideal situation because we can be physically apart and still be in contact through that communication channel. If this is a student who needs to be much closer, then we have to think about layers of protection. Again, we both want to be wearing face masks. We might both be needing gloves. There are some students who will not be able to tolerate a face mask. They may need something like a shield, or you as the instructor may need a shield. And so it really is based on the student's functional ability level. We don't want a student who cannot indicate that they want to take off their mask or need to take off their mask to have to wear a mask, because we want them to be able to have safe breathing. We don't want to interfere with that breathing. So we can't, quote unquote, make someone wear a mask, especially someone who's nonverbal, who doesn't have the ability to explain that to us. When we can provide instructions side by side rather than literally facing face to face, we minimize that risk of those droplets that would carry secretions that could carry virus. And so thinking about how we can minimize as much as possible that direct face to face so that we could at least be side to side, hopefully with some space between us. It really varies from ability level and other individual needs of the student.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. I'm sorry we didn't get to, we got to the majority of questions, but thank you everyone who joined. We will be sharing out the links for the binders when we share out the recording for this webinar. And I'm going to pass it over to Kristen Watucky again as we draw things to a close.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Abigail and Stephanie. And thank you, everyone, for your attention and your thoughtful questions. We will be reaching out to you after the webinar is over with a recording and other resources that Chris has shared. And we hope that you will share the recording with your friends and anyone who is not able to attend. You can also learn more about us by following our Facebook and Twitter pages. And if you are a CSP member, you can join our private CSP Facebook group. We will also be conducting several workshops for College Success Program students over the summer about creative writing and coding, music and literature and wellness. So stay on the lookout for emails about those and other ways that you can connect with the program. And again, we thank you all for coming. And thank you again, Chris, for your great presentation and answering all these questions. And thank you to Stephanie, Abigail, Katie, and Mary for keeping everything moving.
Thank you.